topic, or when you want to continue and be part of a discussion at, let's say, a message board, it's kind of surprising how your portion of the discussion, gets people talking, but then it starts to turn into something else. I'll say this, I mentioned in a spoiler tag or something like that, if you want to call it that I just basically asked a question on there that I don't know if I'd asked before. But basically the question was, and I mentioned this in a previous video, is this story arc, or at least the aftermath of it, is it just an excuse to get Sally fully clothed, to get full body clothing, if you know what I mean? The point I'm trying to make there is this an excuse by, let's say, Ian Flynn, and maybe whoever the artist is, to draw the character with full body clothing? In other words, finally say to Sega, look, she's fully clothed. So she's fully clothed. Now, maybe you could consider doing something with her more than just having her in the comics. Now, it's perfectly understandable for people to feel that way. But what's even more interesting, though, besides that, is how that discussion goes from, could this be why, to talking about artistic styles. And especially artistic styles of the character or other characters and stories. And who's a better artist. And that's something I've never thought about, I've never thought about talking, I've never talked about much. Because to me, it's not just the art. To me, it is the art that drives the story, but it's also what you read that drives the story. But the artwork, I will admit, has been an issue with a lot of fans. You can definitely see that. I mean, there are times I've read some issues where it looks like, okay, why the heck did, they allow the artist to draw the characters like this? There have been issues where I can't even think of the person's name, and they've drawn the characters almost like in a scratch-like style. And you say to yourself, why did they allow him to do that? There are times when, let's say Ken Penders, for example, despite how you feel about the guy, he wrote and drew the stories at for a while. He wrote and drew them. And some people might say that when he wrote and drew them, the style was a little blocky, if you will. Now, I will say this, I'm no artistic person, no artistic expert, if you will. I'm no artistic expert, if you will. But Ken's style at times would be described as being a little blocky. But then there are other people that have done the artwork. There have been people like, say, Don Best, who many did kind of like the style because it was different, and it kind of kept the characters sort of as true to who they were. Just saying. There was some that liked Jay Axer's artwork because even though some looked at it as a little bit of anime-ish, if you will, or whatever style you call it, that it kind of kept the characters true to who they were too, and it wasn't that bad. It was actually pretty good. Everything was equaled out. got, I can't even think of the name right now, but then you got the person that decided for I don't know how many issues to allow the characters to go anime, if you know what I mean. In other words, draw the characters in almost an anime style. Which was alright, but it was kind of weird seeing that anime style. Then you got about one or two stories done by this one lady who did the story between Sally and Nicole, who's mostly known for her Sabrina stories. And then, of course, you got another one back in the early days where the person would draw the characters, not blocky, but kind of horizontally or some kind of diagonally, some kind of like, you know, this way, that way kind of design. But, yeah, it was, you know, and that was okay, not good, but it was okay. And there were some people, I can't think of the names right now, that kept the characters almost exactly as you saw them in the show, in the Saturday AM show. In fact, those issues, to me, spanned at times from the teens all the way up to about the 50s, 60s, 70s, you know, issues, 70s issues at the most. We did see it return a few times, but again, from that time on, throughout some of those issues is when you saw the characters more as what you would see on the show. So that was good. And then as we got, like I said, into the later issues, something happened that a lot of fans, an artist, a few artists, a new artist kind of showed up that has made a return now to the artistic panel when it comes to the comic. And that person's Stephen Butler. Now, to me, Stephen Butler does a great job. I mean, even Sonic Comic World thought he did a great job. And, you know, I understand that there's a lot of people that kind of feel differently about his artwork, and I can understand that. You see, if you have not seen Stephen Butler's artwork in this comic book, or any kind of comic, or social media, or any kind of media, basically his comic, basically his artistic style, basically with his artistic style, he makes the characters, most importantly at times the female characters, seem more humorous, more statuesque, more humorous, if you will. In other words, makes them really stand out, if you know what I mean. And to me, again, Stephen did a great job. I mean, he still continues to do a great job. And yes, I can admit, he's kind of learned to tone down the drawings a little bit because he's had to adapt to the style, which, as some people have said, has been mandated or recommended by Sega to be used from now on. So I get that. So I get and understand that he had to tone down his style, and that's good. Because a lot of people would complain about him, you know, getting too into his work, making the female characters, more importantly, too curvy, too humorous, if you will, too statuesque, if you will, and giving them, and basically you know, working on every detail of them. And I mean every detail. One of the complaints has always been with Sally. In fact, that's one thing people were talking about over at the forums at Sonic Stadium, while I started this, while I asked the question about, you know, is this whole story arc going on right now just an excuse to get Sally fully clothed at the end? And a lot of people, some people did say they like Steven's art, but some said they didn't because he, even though he drew good, he basically put too much detail and too much proportion into certain areas of the female anatomy, if you will, of the characters. Like with Sally, basically her main look, non-roboticized or before robotization and weaponization, was, just boots and a vest. And it's like, and to some people it's like, well, how could he do that with this character? It just makes her stick out too much in everything. Well, you kind of get what I'm saying, right? The truth is, artists like Steven have their own unique style. And yes, maybe they do pay too much detail when it comes to artwork in the comic books. But you know what? Steven Butler is not the only person that has done this in comic books. There have been people, in fact, if you watch Linkara's, some of his reviews, like let's say his review of Catwoman, Guardian of Gotham, his 2-part review there, of both issues, he basically talks about how the artist basically puts too much detail in the female anatomy there, and way too much detail, if you know what I mean. Basically, he's saying that it's basically in Linkara's own words. The artist, I can't think of the artist's name right now, basically looks like basically makes it look like, or draws it like you're watching porn. Or you're reading porn, if you know what I mean. Because the artist, in that 2-issue story, as well in other issues that the artist has worked on for, DC Comics and other comic book companies, just really gets too much into the work in the female anatomy. And again, maybe that's, and again, that's their style. And maybe that's how they were taught. Maybe they were taught that, hey, if you're going to draw the female, the human body, make sure you get every detail so you can distinguish certain parts. And maybe that's how Steven Butler was taught. But again, he's a great artist. There's no doubt about that. And other people do, and a lot of people do like him. But, he's not the only person they like. You got Tracy Yarlin and Ben Bates that people like as well. And the list goes on of artists that have come through there. John W.B. Gray, Herbs, if you will. They've all gone through and worked on that comic. But they've all had their different kind of styles. You take a look at animation in television at times, and there are certain portions of animation in an episode of basically in an episode of a cartoon, at times, that's different from another part of that episode. A good example of this would be the episode Gangbusters from Tiny Toons. Now I know some people might say, well, there was no artistic change. Take a look at the last half, the showdown, the rapping showdown between Buster and his friends and Max's gang. You'll see the difference in style. You'll see the difference in style. If you know what I mean. You'll see that difference. Heck, I think you even see a little bit of that difference in the Acme Bowl episode as well. But still, there's different artistic styles that go out and say, you know what? We could do it this way, but let's do it this way as well. And I know some might say, well, the reason they did what they did at the end of the Gangbusters with the rapping confrontation, the rapping battle, if you will, is because it was full of action. You needed a drawing style that made it feel like that could deal with all that action and dancing and stuff. And heck, I'll even admit this, the episode Hair Today, Gone Tomorrow, same thing. Most of it like the first two parts were drawn completely by a completely different artist. Last part of that episode, totally different artist. You could see it. Now, even in animation, characters at times can get drawn, if it's a female character as well, can get drawn a little over excessively, as some people have pointed out with what Stephen Butler has done. You take a look at Tailspin. There are episodes with a female character, whoever it is, mostly at times Rebecca, sometimes a one-shot character like Katie or the princess, whatever her name was, that was voiced by Katsushi, believe it or not. Alright, and you can tell that because Katsushi uses her natural voice with that princess character like she does Sally. But again, depending on that character, or Ken Kaburo, whatever, or any other female character, there are times where episodes where the character can be drawn a little over excessively, as some people put it. I mean, I remember watching some episodes with Rebecca, and you could tell that the character was drawn a little over excessively, not much, but you could tell more feministy, or more of a feminine look was added at times. Same with Rescue Rangers and the character Gadget. You could tell at times the same thing. You know, Darkwing Duck, Bonkers, you know, Goof Troop, all the female characters there, even if they were one-shots, all drawn at times to look more feminine than what they already did look like. I mean, you look at Peg and Egg, alright? You look at Peg. You look at, you look at Morgana. You know, you look at Morgana, you know, you look at Fondia and Miranda Wright, and even Lucky Bacall's wife, if you will. All differently. All, at times, more, as some people say, over excessively. Elisa Maza and Gargoyles, if you will. Mallory and Tanya, mostly at times Mallory. You get the point that I'm trying to make, right? The point I'm trying to make is that everybody has a different artistic style. You know, you cannot change that. You gotta just look at it and say, okay, that's how this person draws things, fine. I mean, take a look. There's a person called Trunks. I can't think of the rest of the name on DeviantArt, who's trying to be part of who's trying to get hired on eventually as part of the RT comic book team, artistic team. And they have a style that when you look at it, you're like, wow, that's a pretty damn good style. That's more of a style I can get used to. And it is. It is. I mean, there's even somebody called Darth Omni Shadow. Darth Omni Shadow on there, who does some great artwork too. And he just recently graduated last year from high school, and he's going to college now. Out for that. And he's going to college now for that. And the thing is, here's a kid, or here's a young guy, that could also, given the opportunity, could work for them as well. But again, it's all about people having this different artistic styles. I mean, you look at Marvel Comics, you look at DC Comics, you look at the iconic books that they have: Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, X-Men, Justice League, Wonder Woman, Avengers, Fantastic Four. And they've all drawn, all the artistic styles used there have all been differently. They've all been different. They all have their different artistic styles. I mean, Stan Lee has even said, I can't think of the person's name right now, if it was Ditko or whoever, when they debuted in Mary Jane, it's like, holy dang. You know, man, did he ever draw a beautiful character. It's all about artistic style. Take a look at the blue journal, blue graphic novel of Spider-Man, which is basically like a love letter to Gwen Stacy. And how they do their own reimagining, their own remake of that introduction. It's like, holy dang. And it's not just with the female characters. I mean, you can tell right off the bat, even with the male characters, whether it's in comic books or animation, what kind of style you're going to get. Again, it's all about people having different artistic styles and tastes. I know some people will take it the wrong way, and that's fine. That's completely fine. But here's the thing. It's all about having different tastes and style. Okay? I mean, even a classic Sonic Sat AM, Jay Foxfire and Bring On the Thunder, Taven Munkart. If they felt like it and they wanted to say, hey, I want to apply to be an artist for your comic books, or I want to apply to be an artist for your cartoons or your movies. And, if they applied and let's say they got accepted, and let's say someone from Disney was to come up to Taven Munkart and say, okay, we're going to use your style in one of our episodes. How would you like that? Or we're going to use one of your styles in our comic books. How would you like that? Taven would be happy about it because he'd be drawing a comic or a scene, if you will, or several scenes or an entire episode in his style, whether you liked it or not. Same with Jay Foxfire. If someone from, let's say, let's say somebody from Warner Brothers, Warner Brothers Animation. Let's say somebody from Warner Brothers Animation came up to him and said, Jay, we want you to draw the next Scooby-Doo director animated film. Or we want you to draw the next animated show for us. It would be in her style. Same with Bring On the Thunder. If some anime company came up to her and said, Bring On the Thunder, we want you to draw our next show or movie. It would be her style. It's all about people having different artistic style, folks. It doesn't matter. So, to me, just enjoy what you read, and if it has an odd style in it that's different than what you're used to, or you may or may not agree with, that's fine. That's completely fine because everybody has a different taste. So, again, artists have different artistic styles, and that's all I'm going to say about it. Comment below, tell me what you guys think. Video response if you like. I'll talk to you later.